Thank you, Supervisor Kirk, and thank you for coming out on a Thursday evening. I know there's probably other things you would rather be doing, but we're glad you're here. And as Supervisor Kirk said, one of my goals in any type of work that I ever do is it's about relationships. So that's why we're here. We're here as your local government, building relationships and helping you get to know us. And that the goal in that is also breaking down barriers. When you have a concern or an issue or even a criticism, that you feel more comfortable to pick up the phone or to send that email so that we're aware of it. What I've found, and many of us have found, is that many times people think we know about something and we really don't. So this is our opportunity that you will be able to connect a face to some of our departments, and that you will then pick up that phone or walk into our office and come in and chat with us. So if you look around, these are all the different county departments. Of course, not all of them are here, but most of them. And what we will encourage you to do is spend the time talking to the individuals here, and that you can ask your questions. I will also let you know that when I finish with this isn't very long. I don't want to drone on at you. I will not take questions from up here. What we will do is we will stay until the last person leaves. So that means that if you have follow-up questions from what you hear, I'm going to encourage you to come in and talk to any of us. And if we don't know the answer, we'll take you to someone who does. And if the collection of us doesn't know it, we will find out and get back to you. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. And we will see what we have to share with you here. So this is our agenda, and what we talk about is we'll go through the who are we, what do we do, how do we fund the services. We don't get into a whole lot of numbers during this presentation. And then again, the opportunity to visit the department tables and ask your questions and interact with those individuals that have come up this evening. So who are we? So this, you heard Supervisor Kirk say about 80, we went through and looked, 81% of our employees actually live in Tuolumne County. And the point of this slide is that those of us who live and work here, we are part of the community. And that's important that we put that out there and we have that connection. So we are going to church with you. We are in community service groups. We are coaches, grandparents, parents, all of those different types of things. And so we are interacting with everyone at many different levels, not just as a local government employee. Okay, this is not my favorite slide, but who is your county administrator? So, as you know, my name is Tracy Riggs. And so our mission in our office is to support the Board of Supervisors in achieving their goals through service and collaboration with county departments and the community. And then when the board hired me, in addition to their priorities, I had outlined some of my own priorities as I came into the position. And my first one was, we talked about, was transparency, and so did Supervisor Kirk. So you may have noticed, for those of you engaged, we completely changed up the way we do our budget presentations. For the first time, all of the department heads got up there and they did a presentation to the board to outline the services, their needs, and to give their priorities. And that was the first time we did that. Building trust, that's part of why we're here. It's about building those relationships so that you get to know who each of us are. And workplace culture. So we've had, in the last about 3 to 5 years, 50% of our employees, we've had a great amount of turnover. That equates to a high cost. It equates to also not having consistency in the way that we provide service. So we are trying to create a culture that people want to stay in the community and they want to work. So we've been working on that. We have employee development. That's part of workplace culture. We are investing in our staff. And I'm looking, you guys probably can't see, can you? I'm going to go off over to the side over here. So developing in our staff, which only also helps to provide greater customer service. And then proactive communication. I love working in teams. I don't pretend to do all things, nor can I or any of us do all things. We need each other to make this work. And I'm looking at some familiar faces that I've worked with in different teams over the years through emergency services. And it's only through a collective body that we can do more. And that's what the teamwork is about. Our teams are not just within the organization, they are external participants as well. And then helping our staff to achieve their professional and personal goals. So again, through professional development, can we help them and help people get the education and training they want so they can progress through their careers? And that's really important. Okay, so what do we do? So the California Constitution says that public safety is the first responsibility of local government and that local officials have an obligation to give priority to the provision of adequate public safety. Public safety comes in many forms. The first thing most of us think about is law enforcement and fire, and they're the very first of when we look at our first responders. But it comes also in the form of roads, our social services, child welfare, behavioral health, district attorney, public defender, probation, and then all of the ancillary support services in administration with our assessor, our auditor controller, and our tax collector, as well as, again, board of supervisors. So it goes on, but it's the collective body that creates that public safety and that environment in any community. And then the board's mission statement, which is creating a healthy and safe community, exercising natural, cultural, and financial resource stewardship, promoting economic prosperity, and enhancing the quality of life. Okay, so many times as staff, we will get phone calls from individuals throughout the year, and they'll say, I don't even use any county services. And so we started going through the conversation amongst all of us about, is that true? Do we have people who would not ever use any of the local government services? So some of this is to illustrate what some of these departments do, but also to illustrate that we all utilize these services at one level or another. So in this one, our building division, for those of us, when you're living in a house or any other type of structure, that is there because the building division has been there to make sure that the roof was done right, the electrical, the plumbing, your septic, all of that. That is our building division and the environmental health department that makes sure that those are safe structures for us to live in. And then I kind of hit on environmental health. Environmental health does a lot of things, but one of the things that we always did you know, environmental health has to do inspections of every single food establishment in our county. And when I talked to Rob, and Rob is over here, our environmental health director, over to the right here, he was saying there are 478 food establishments, and he tries to get to each one of those, him and his staff, at least twice a year. So it kind of gives you an idea. There's only 3 of you, Rob? 4 now. So 4 of them and that's only one particular part of what they do. And then weights and measures. Many people don't know that for weights and measures that the staff have to go out every time they say that something is a pound or a gallon or liters or quart of wood, whatever that might be. They have to go out, and our ag commissioner and weights and sealers in the back, Kelly Schroeder back here, she goes and her staff, they make sure that when you think you're getting a gallon of gas, that you really are getting a gallon of gas. And they have to go out there and certify each one of, anywhere you see a weights and measures, they have certified that establishment. And surveyor GIS, so if you're gonna go out and you're putting up a fence, and you want to make sure that you don't put your fence on someone else's property, you can go down to the surveyor's office, GIS, and they will make sure by working with you, they can provide you a map of your property so you know where it is that your property lines exist. And our recorder's office, they record every single public document that has to go through, such as your marriage license, a title document for property, and you can go down there and they can get you those copies anytime you were to, and that's Kanan Whitman, and I don't see Kanan here, but we do have, he has represented in the back of the room here if you have any questions. County roads. This is always a big topic, right? Roads is always, that's like almost one of the, that is right up there with public safety when we talk about law enforcement and fire. So with roads, as soon as we get out, any of us who drive on a county road, we're utilizing local government resources. And so, you know, we have, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but our road crews are out there when we just had snow up here, right? They're the ones out there putting sand on the road, trying to get to all of these areas to do the snow plows. And when you see how many people we have to do our 600 miles, you'll be surprised at how much work an area that they have to cover in a year. So community concerns. Some of you may have participated in a recent survey where we started asking what are some of the concerns of our community. And when the poll came back, it was very interesting to find out that they are actually quite perfectly aligned with the board's priorities. So the ones on the left are what our community said were their top concerns, and the one on the right are the board's priorities. The number one priority for those who participated in the polling was wildfire risk, not a surprise. And actually that has been the number one priority for our board as well for this year, and a lot of work has been accomplished. The other one is roads. We've talked about that, and I know I got quite a reaction from you. So roads has always been a priority for our board. And then drug abuse, that's always a big concern, and affordable housing, which feeds into our vulnerable populations, and that is essential. And there's a lot of focus. If you haven't been watching, the board did just approve a position for a homeless advocate and outreach coordinator, and they'll be working with the state and the community to begin addressing some of those needs that we know we need to address. Okay, so here's some of the information I was talking about. Road services. For those of you who don't know, we only have 3 road crews, and that consists of 24 employees, so 8 on each of those crews. And they have to take care of 610 miles of roadways. And Tanya Allen, our supervising, it's not Allen, it's Sanguinetti. I'm sorry. So she had let us know that 610 miles is equivalent to us driving to Salt Lake City. And we have 24 individuals who are tasked with taking care of all of that roadway. And the other thing that's interesting is that I didn't know when I first came in, because I came in from the private sector, that there's a public contract code that tells us when we can do projects with our road crews and when we have to contract out. So interestingly enough, any project over $60,000, we have to contract out. And when we contract out, it has to be paid with prevailing wage. And so that increases the cost up to 35%. So when many people are wondering, why aren't the road crews out there doing more construction projects? Because they can't. We have to contract it out. And our county fire department, we have 22 career staff, and you may or may not know we do contract with CAL FIRE, and they do an amazing job for us. And we have 56 volunteers. We could not do the fire the way that we do it without our volunteers. This year, the board did allocate enough funding for the fire department to buy a new fire engine, so that was incredible. And they respond to an average of 5,500 incidents every year. And then you can see, we talk about where does the funding come from. Almost 50% of their funding comes from property taxes. This year, 30% of their funding came from the general fund, which means the board took their discretionary revenues and allocated additional revenues towards fire. And this year, that number is higher because of that allocation for that fire engine. State grants, federal funds, and then there's a Proposition 172, which provides funding across the board to many of our public safety departments. Now, the county sheriff's department, this one's interesting as well. This last year, the sheriff started a emergency medical dispatch, EMD. That is something that we did not have previously. And what this means is that our dispatchers can provide a much higher level of response while you're on the phone with them. And if you have any questions about that, I encourage you to speak to Sheriff Pooley in the back. They have 12 dispatchers, 72 deputy positions, or office and deputy positions. And their average response times, as you can see, for an emergency is just under 12 minutes, and for non-emergency, about 42 minutes. But what I found interesting on here is you can look over on the very top right, they received 161,000 phone calls this last year. That's a lot of phone calls for 12 dispatchers to handle. And then 33,000 of those were for emergency medical dispatch. And they saved 4 lives in that amount of time since they've started. So it's really making an impact on our community. And then there's a few other statistics. So the Sheriff's Patrol received 52,000 calls this last year. And then there's some breakdown of the types of calls that they, traffic stops, citations, arrests. What we want to make sure we talk about here is the Sheriff's Office has had an incredible increase in the number of calls and arrests that they've made over the last years. And what that means is there's a cascading effect that goes to our district attorney's office, our public defender, and probation. And so every time that, as we see those call volumes go up, we also see the number of cases that have to be handled continue to increase for our justice partners. And our county detention facilities, we have 2. We have the juvenile hall, which is for our juveniles under, and I'm looking, under what age? It's not just 18 anymore, right? Yeah, it's. If you have questions, we have Mike Arndt in the back, and he can give you some specific details. So they have 14 full-time equivalent employees. They currently house between 17 and 20 juveniles. In the past, that number was relatively small. In these last few months, it's been up at the 20 mark, and not, many times you'll hear there's only 3 people in there. That's not true. They've been up at that 20 mark for the number of juveniles that have been in there. And we're seeing a better participation from the other region around us. So from Mariposa, Calaveras, and Amador, who are the region that we partnered with. And the difference between juvenile and adult is juvenile does have a mandated ratio, so 3 full-time equivalents to run at any given time. And then we have the jail. So the jail right now has 49 full-time equivalent positions. That will go up to 60 when we open up the new jail. The average daily population for the current jail is 142 inmates. And then they provided for the adult detention center a few of our, just some highlights of the laundry, the sick calls, number of incidents. You can see the incidents for fights and drugs and medical issues has risen 42% in the last 3 years. And a lot of that is the realignment, AB 109, which kind of shifted the types of individuals that are being housed. And again, the Sheriff's Office and probation can give you some additional information on that. District Attorney. Our District Attorney is an elected department head. She has an assistant district attorney, 5 attorneys, 6 support staff, 2 investigators, and 9 victim witness employees. And I always like to highlight, there was not that long ago that we had a much smaller victim witness, and we have a much higher victim witness. She has 3 cost centers now that focus on serving our victims. And that's because Ginger Martin, who's in the back, has done a great deal of work in going out and securing grants in order to expand upon those services. And you can see the District Attorney's Office reviewed 4,800 cases last year. They filed on 4,000 of those, and that's an average of 577 cases per attorney. Our Public Defender's Office, and they're also here tonight and represented. They have, the Public Defender is actually a difference between Public Defender, District Attorney. Public Defender is a board-appointed position. They have 6 attorneys, 4 public defenders, 2 conflict counsel, and 5 support staff. They had almost 2,000 cases last year, and for them, that's almost 500 cases per attorney. This also has been increasing over the last few years. Animal control. It's amazing the work that our animal control office does with 9 employees. And they do round-the-clock calls, they respond, they do everything they possibly can. They had over 3,300 calls for service, and they had 1,300 animals. They also partner with not only the Humane Society, but also different rescue groups. And if you have any questions, Mike Mazook, who's the animal control officer, manager, he's in the back, and he can answer any questions. And it shows 70 animals adopted here locally for that year. Vulnerable populations, one of the biggest and other big priorities of our board. Behavior health. We have 68 employees in the behavior health department. They see 2,300 individuals and 1,700 Medi-Cal beneficiaries. 475 of the individuals they serve are under the age of 21. And social services. This is an interesting slide as well. They have 108 full-time employees, or that's how many are allocated. Child welfare is one of their departments, so is adult protective services, or I'm sorry, divisions within. They had 805 referrals for child welfare last year and 531 referrals for adult protective services. What's really interesting, if you look at the Medi-Cal beneficiaries, we have 11,446 Medi-Cal beneficiaries at the time they took this. That's 20% of our population. So every 1 out of 5 adults within our county is receiving some form of public assistance. CalFresh, which is the old form of food stamps, so it's food assistance, that's 4,400. And then CalWorks, which is 200 adults and 600 children. Over on the right, there are 2 green squares. I don't make sure I'm not in anyone's way. This is important because $2.6 million went out in aid payments. That helps with utilities and rent, and almost $6 million in actual benefits went out to help individuals with food assistance in our county last year. Okay, so how do we fund? This is a little bit of what we're going to go into with dollars and money, but not a whole lot here. So our revenue sources, if you look at on the right, we have the blue and the green, that's state and federal. 50% of our revenues come from state and federal sources. So when you hear us talking about budget and we're talking about how state and federal revenues continue to decline, they don't continue, they will have us do certain services telling us they're mandated, and then as what we watch is those revenues that they originally provided begin to decline, while the mandate to provide those services remains the same. We have local taxes, which would be like your property taxes, your sales tax, your transient occupancy tax, which is your hotel tax. That's 22%. Fees, we are able to charge a little bit for fees. We only can recapture a portion of what is actually the cost to provide that service. And the board has never charged full cost for any of the services that are provided. Like recreation, for example, I think the charge is 30% of the cost and for those services. And Eric Aiken, who is our recreation manager, is in the back if you have any questions related to any of the programs. And let's see. And then we have a few others. We have some. We do have some loan proceeds and some other transfers that we do and some interest that we're able to utilize to help with services. So we want to have the conversation about dedicated versus discretionary revenues. And the reason is we often hear, why don't you take money from social services and go pave the roads? Or why don't you do something for behavioral health and get more deputies? And we can. That's the answer to that. So dedicated funding is funding that comes to us with a specific purpose. And essentially they tell us exactly what we can do with that funding. And grant funding is one of those that would be dedicated, as is SB1, the new road funding that voters approved. We have grant funded for our storms, and then, like I said, for behavioral health, public health, and for social services. Those are also a form of dedicated funding. And then we have discretionary funding. Discretionary funding is where the board has the ability to decide how to spend that money. It means it doesn't come with strings attached. So that, again, would be property taxes, our sales tax, transient occupancy tax. Those are the big ones that we have for the board to be able to decide how to spend. So where does that discretionary funding go? So we have, as you can see, the board has always said that public safety is one of their primary priorities. And 56% of our discretionary funding that comes in is for public safety. 16% is for administration, and you can see some of those departments. We have 15% for support services, 5% for recreation and library, and then you can see the others when we look at our community development and then some other smaller departments. We get a lot of questions about, when I pay my property tax, what's happening with it? And I'm going to point out we have Debbie Batista, who's our elected clerk, auditor, controller. Yeah, so if you have specific questions, she is the guru on all of that, and she can answer any of your questions. But if you look at this, when we pay property taxes, with the amount that comes back, 64% of what we're paying goes towards our schools. So if you're wondering where is the majority of your property tax funds going, it's going to support our schools. Then we have 26% that comes into the county government. We have the city of Sonora, that's that small 1%. We have fire districts for 5 and special districts for 4. And again, if you have questions specific like what's a special district, Debbie can answer all of those for you and give you great detail. The other question we get is sales tax. When I spend sales tax and the sales tax is collected, Who's keeping it? Where's it going? So for every $100 that we spend, here's the breakdown. So right now, the current sales tax for Tuolumne County is 7.25%, which is the minimum that any county can have. When you spend, or we spend, $100, $6 stays with the state of California because they actually get the sales tax and then it's reallocated back to counties. $1 stays with Tuolumne County and 25% goes to TCTC. We've had a lot of questions on this lately because people have been confused, as what I have found is many people thought that whole 7.25% was staying here locally, and that's not the case. 6% goes back to the state. So how does your local government increase revenues? So we look at our grant funding. We have done an incredible job with our grant funding. Increased fees for county services, we just went through that, but we're very careful about that because we know that those are hard for people to pay when they're going in and needing those resources. Economic development, we're always looking at, can we increase the base and can we help coordinate and facilitate the process for opening new businesses or staying in business and retaining. So sometimes people come to us and say, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and we have our Innovation and Business Assistance Director. People can contact him, and he will begin helping. Maybe you can't afford the rent in your current location. He can help you find maybe another place that might be a little less expensive. Voter approval of property tax increases and voter approval of sales and TOT tax. So Supervisor Gray had a great idea. We've been talking about our competitive grants, and he wanted us to go back and look and see how much has staff been able to secure in grant funding. So we went back 5 years, and we know that this is not the total number, but what we were able to find rather quickly is that we have received over $45 million in grant funds that we would not receive had the staff not gone out and worked on those competitive grants. And for our size of a community, as you all know, that's a huge amount. That's our tree mortality. That was our drought programs. Those are some different roads. Those are bridges. Those are all of these different storms we've had getting our roads fixed. There's, we have, like I said, Ginger Martin with our victim witness. She's always looking. I think I'm looking around. Almost every single department is applying for grants. So again, they can answer some specific questions for you. But remember that the grant funding always comes with strings. The board can't decide to use it in any other way than what is specifically stated in those grant documents. Okay, so that is our presentation. And like I said, I'm not going to take questions from up here. We will all stick around, and if you have specific questions, we are happy to work with you. If we don't know it, we will find the answer and get back to you.